the audience? They can raise their hand raise their Zoom hand and we'll let you in. If not, it's like I don't see any. So we're good.
Okay, so meeting minutes, we're gonna go ahead and put that off.
Yes. Yeah. I don't think I sent them out. I was still reviewing them, so that'll be next month too.
Okay, great. We'll be looking for them next month. So why don't we just move on to City Forester's report?
Will do. Good morning, commissioners. Great to see you. Thanks for your time, as usual. I have for you today 7 items. Can you hear me all right, everyone? Thank you. First, as you may know from emails from Brian and Director Long, the city will be changing its structure soon, taking effect July 1st, the new fiscal year. Instead of the current 6 service areas in the city structure, there will be 4. And according to that email you received, the latest changes are driven by the goals of efficiency in using public funds and the city budget gap, so helping to address that gap. The 2 service areas that have been removed are the budget and finance area and vibrant communities, or that will be removed starting July 1st. Budget and finance, those functions will move either into the city operations area or directly into the city administrator's office. And more directly relevant to us in this room and you, the vibrant communities service area will be dissolved, and those functions will move into either community and economic development service area or the public works service area. Urban forestry as part of Parks and Recreation and all of Parks and Recreation will become part of the Public Works service area. So in that structure, starting on July 1st, we will have a different Deputy City Administrator. Priya Dhanapal is the DCA, as we say over there. You may recall that when the new form of government was being developed, there was a time when Parks was in Public Works. So that's come back around. We'll be back in that structure. Was planned to be in Public Works. I should correct myself. That plan changed, and now starting July 1st, that will be where Parks is located with Urban Forestry. My next item for you is about commission appointments. The Urban Forestry Commission appointments were heard by the Climate Resilience and Land Use Committee of City Council last week. They confirmed the 2 folks who were put forward and forwarded them for consideration to the whole council. That will be on May 7th. This is the structure that council has been developing, where substantive discussion is in the committee meetings, and the committee makes recommendations to the full council. So this follows that pattern. The candidates are Matt Sanchez and Vesla Lee. Both of those folks took time to attend the committee meeting with council, either in person or virtually, and they were asked some questions. But we're pleased to see that their appointments are proceeding. We think that they could be seated as early as June, given the city's process. Next item, on April 1st, Urban Forestry staff briefed the Council Finance Committee on our proposed fee schedule changes that would begin starting July 1st, again, the new fiscal year. As you likely recall, you all were briefed on that fee schedule, proposed fee schedule, and advised on it. It eliminates many permit fees thanks to PSEP funds replacing revenue. So we no longer need to recover costs for providing the service thanks to PSEP in those cases. And that's primarily the cost of the staff doing that work. We're really excited in Urban Forestry about reducing barriers to tree care and reducing barriers to folks following the city's requirements. The Finance Committee voted to amend the proposed fee schedule by eliminating fees for administrative reviews and appeals and eliminating fees for enforcement violation review. Therefore, they will recommend to the full council the fee schedule that we proposed with those changes. So those have been zeroed out instead of having a cost. And again, those costs are driven by collecting the revenue to pay for the services. Staff also gave the Finance Committee a briefing on code enforcement. The fee schedule is planned to go to the full city council for approval on May 7th. Two things on May 7th. Next item, an update on the PGE Harborton project, which I'm sure you all recall from previous meetings. The code hearings officer approved the permit application review for the project. That has been appealed by the Forest Park Conservancy and the Forest Park Neighborhood Association. Therefore, it goes to the city council for their decision, and there's a public hearing on that today, starting at 2 o'clock. Next item, the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability is leading a project now to update parts of Title 33, the Building and Zoning Code. A specific project title is Public Infrastructure Environmental Code Update. Its purpose is to update and streamline code requirements for public infrastructure such as drinking water supply facilities that are located in environmental zones. I'll put a link in the chat to the project page so you can look more closely. Urban Forestry is involved in the project, working with BPS staff, and we've also requested for them to do a briefing for you all, and thinking it may be in May next month. The next item is about the long discussed, much anticipated Urban Forestry Commission field trip. At this point, we're thinking it could be in June or in August. Obviously during the warmer months would be better when leaves are on and it's more fun than if it's raining sideways on us. Do any folks have known issues with either of those dates? It would be the regular meeting time in June or in August. Do you know of any conflicts? Or you can always let us know later. Yeah, we can email about it. Thank you, Brian. Last thing, thanks to Commissioner Nelson for the suggestion by email, which you all got, about recognizing the current Heritage Tree Committee members, many of whom are very long serving in that role as volunteers. And so we are going to look at having that as an agenda item for you all to discuss at your next meeting on whether to send a letter or something like that to recognize them, as Commissioner Nelson had suggested. I will say we at Urban Forestry are very grateful to the members of the Heritage Tree Committee. They've gotten recognition from us recently on that. And we're pleased to see the evolution of the Heritage Tree Committee as like a volunteer program similar to the neighborhood tree team type structure where folks can choose different roles for themselves and still be very involved with heritage trees. That concludes my report. If anyone has questions, please ask.
I know that Commissioner Lilly just put into the chat that our June UFC meeting is actually on Juneteenth, which is a city holiday. So take a look at that. Thank you for noting that.
Should have caught that. Thank you,
Yeah.
Commissioner Lilly. So probably not in June.
Comment, Commissioner Nelson?
I have a question. I don't recall the level of questioning of potential candidates for UFC ever happening, at least from city council members. It's a new thing. I mean, certainly they have the authority, but it was intriguing. I thought I was at a Watergate hearing or something. I'm dating myself, I know that. But anyway, I guess it's just a reminder we're in very different times in how we operate with city council structure that is working its way out.
Thanks for the comment. Yeah, it is a different structure and different folks on council.
I do think that's part of the intent with the committee structure too, going from a 5-person council to 12 and having the USP council met once a month. And now with all the committees that are meeting every other week, you know, we're up to like 15 meetings a month or so. So I think that is a bit of a function of council potentially having more time to.
I did appreciate, I mean, I think it gave urban forestry staff an opportunity to really educate at least those members who are on the finance committee, who I suspect knew very little about the operation, so
For sure, yeah,
that was positive, I thought.
yeah, I agree.
Just clarification on that though, because I had the same question. So are they now gonna interview every employee? Potential new employee, or what's the,
Good question.
yeah,
No, we haven't seen that happen, and that isn't planned for the form of government. That's more operation side, and
Right.
is the responsibility of bureau directors and
Right.
their chains of command. I would think things like the city administrator, that might be different. We might work with the mayor on appointing a city administrator, but vast majority of staff, that has not changed.
A point of information, I don't know if our two guests wanted to make public
Yeah, I
testimony.
was gonna check,
or,
yeah.
If there are other reasons.
No,
Okay,
Okay, great.
Well,
Thank you.
welcome.
Yeah,
It's nice to
thank
have you
very much
here.
for- Thank you for coming.
any other questions, thoughts, comments, commissioners? Yeah, I had a quick one, actually, as we were talking about heritage tree. It would probably be good for us to, have a presentation or a thought on, so what is the entire structure now? And how does Urban Forestry Commission relate to the Heritage Committee? Is it still gonna only be, for assignment or delisting of them? Or because there's now not a community committee, where I guess I just don't really understand what the structure is now, and is there, and so therefore is there a gap, is there a need somehow for this committee to step up more and take on some things that the other committee was doing? I have no idea.
Great idea, we can plan time for that. I think in a nutshell, to answer that question, the relationship with the commission doesn't change. And in terms of nominating trees, that process has been. We will look for a time to do a heritage tree. We have other updates on the heritage tree program anyway that y'all have asked for and we've been planning to do. Just waiting to get them done before we come back.
I got a question I'd like to ask about the finance committee's changes that are going to the city council. Is that something that urban forestry is in favor of, or is that something that we would want to inform council that this is not the decision that we are in favor of?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Clapp. I think we understand and agree with the purpose, which is to remove barriers to due process in the case of administrative review and appeals, and just remove another cost to property owners who are in a code compliance situation. We expressed to council that our main concern is that our capacity might get taxed. We don't know if eliminating those fees will change the volume that comes in for staff to work on.
Yeah.
In response, council said we should let them know if we're seeing that challenge. And my understanding was they would not want to see long time lapses in addressing the applications because we don't have staff to do it, and might be able to help if we get to that point. We also provided the DCA Szymanski with information about how those permit process fees measure up with other bureaus' comparable fees. In other words, other bureaus are charging for appeals and the equivalent of violation reviews. So we put that together and provided it to the district's deputy city administrator, who provided that information to the council chair, council president. Our intention in that was just consistent practice across the city, that if barriers need to be removed for folks having their due process, then likely that should apply across all bureau functions. So Bureau of Transportation, Portland Permitting and Development, and those sorts of things.
I'm glad you brought that up because that is something that I have noticed historically on this commission, even not between us, but in issues that have come before us, that urban forestry is treated quite differently. And in my opinion, justifiably so in certain situations. But I think that's a very good point to make, City Forester Cairo, because it really is important to note that the regulations that the city is enforcing relating to the tree code, which was asked for and delivered in 2015, that it's important that we are being held to the same standard as all the other bureaus. So urban forestry, though it looks nice, and you've heard me say this many times, we are under parks, which are used differently, but we are infrastructure. That's what we are here managing, is infrastructure components. You can add green onto it if you want to add a different category, but ultimately, I think it's important that the city council understands that if we are treated now under public works, then everything should be aligned with that in terms of the goals laid out fairly clearly in terms of the urban forestry plan as to what exactly it is we are doing here and why there's so much staff working so hard for all these trees and all these regulations are in place. You can tell them I said so.
Commissioner Vandermark.
Well, PC, I really appreciated that. And I don't know if you all know how to answer this question. It might come up with tree code and code compliance. But I am curious why kind of trees as green infrastructure is looked at as if it's overly regulatory, whereas like building infrastructure or other types of infrastructure. I think Casey, your comment made me just think of that. I don't really know how to speak to that. It may just be this larger thought that green infrastructure is different and not valued in the same way, but it does seem the way that it is treated as a nicety rather than an inherent like necessity. And so I'm just curious as we're kind of navigating, and I think we're going to get to it, code compliance and some of these interesting complexities about how certain things are viewed one way versus another within our city's regulatory entities. And I don't really know what I would love a long nuanced thought. I realize we don't have time, but I'm just
We
trying
do
to
have
bring
time.
this up.
I disagree. We have an extra 15 minutes at the end of this. This is
We're
what we should
actually
be talking about.
yeah, ahead of time, so it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I-
insightful. Go ahead.
I think that's it's important. It's an important thing to kind of think about because even during different issues that have come up in terms of infrastructure on a public works permit, I have seen. I live in Northeast Portland. They're redoing sidewalks, the ADA ramps all over the place, and consistently people will remove entire sections of the road or of the sidewalk section, rebuild it entirely, move electric poles, and they'll do it from nothing to a completely different situation in a matter of weeks. And yet we still see trees as this temporary piece of infrastructure. Like, oh, well, we can cut that down and we can replant a new one. But to cut down a 20-inch tree and replant a 2-inch tree, that's going to take decades to get there, if ever. Whereas all this other infrastructure that we see as very permanent is literally fixable in a matter of days with a certain with just the right crews doing the work. And on the other side of that is that one infrastructure component starts to degrade and depreciate immediately after it's in the ground, whereas the other does the exact opposite. I'll let you guys guess which ones are which. But I think that's an important note that we should keep hammering to council to make sure that they understand these should be treated very similarly, but also understand the nuanced distinctions between them.
Thanks. Actually, I was having some of the same thoughts in Northeast with the ramp construction and so forth, that if we had more collaboration and coordination with spending all that money, we could have done more tree planting or green space improvement with that. Instead, the opposite is happening. Green space is being removed to build those often. So the valuing and the coordination.
Yeah.
City
Oh.
Forester.
Thanks for bringing up that topic, Commissioner Van Mark. Very interesting, worthy of lots of discussion. I wanted to give information and also my perspective, which may or may not be worth it. The information, things like the ADA ramps in Irvington, for example. Urban Forestry is involved in those. We're required to be involved, and we are routinely engaged by Bureau of Transportation to do that. And alternatives are sought to tree removal in each and every case. Sometimes there can't be a design that keeps a tree and also provides the access ramps that we're required to have in the city, given current designs and practices. The perspective I wanted to offer, that was the information. The perspective I wanted to offer is, I think the conversation y'all are having is very similar to conversations being had in a lot of municipalities across the US and maybe the world in terms of trees as infrastructure. So not alone and a challenge. And I tend to think it's because we're the new kids on the block, relatively speaking, compared to other infrastructure systems. For example, potable water supply and wastewater management systems, they've been around a long time. The concept of nature as essential urban infrastructure, however, I think is a newer concept. And I see Brian has his hand up.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that. I really appreciate all these comments, and it's an observation that I think a lot of us have had, particularly in the last few weeks. I think the other part of it too is I don't know of any other public infrastructure, public amenity, public asset that overlaps so heavily with private property owners. And I think that's where the intersection really, I think it's difficult for elected city staff want to balance those things. Because when it's sidewalks, when it's stormwater facilities, street lights, it's all within the right of way and it's all under the direction, management, funding obligations of the city. We have street trees that are the responsibility of the adjacent property owner. Most of our forest is on people's private property in yards. And so we have these questions of public benefit versus private property rights that come up when we talk about trees that we don't have with other infrastructure in the city. So I think that really, I think particularly for city council, I think they really wrestle with that. I think they should. That's a good thing to wrestle with, but it's a perspective they have to balance. I think it just doesn't come up when we're talking about sidewalk infrastructure in the same way. So yeah, that's just a reflection that I think, because I've been trying to balance this too and think about how do we have these conversations? How do we balance those things? I think we're doing great things for that. I think PSEP's really enabling a lot of that. Street tree maintenance solves. That was something we said at Finance Committee. That's going to solve a lot of this. We have staff that have worked in other cities and these issues don't come up as much because the city provides street tree maintenance and takes that burden off the property owner. So we start to, when we place less of the burden on individual property owners, you know, the number of people interacting with the system decreases significantly and people just receive the benefits of it and not the obligation. So good thing for us to keep talking about. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, one thing I do want to add on to that, Brian, thank you very much. And if we are talking about, actually, before I go, Brian, do you have a title that I should be using?
Yeah, strategy and planning manager. You do not need to address me by title.
Okay, sorry.
Brian is fine.
All right, Mr. Brian. I appreciate that idea, but I also know that we have a lot of regulations on private property. You cannot build your house close to X amount of, or you cannot build it within X distance of your property line. It can't be too high. You can't have all of these different other restrictions in terms of electricity and things. And what this leads me to think is that all of those things, if you think about everything that is a part of the building code, it all comes down to safety and public health. Those are the two big primary things. And we also deal with that consistently with trees in the urban forest. So if we regulated them to say, well, actually, everything is changing and this is almost every tree that grows on one property affects all of the other properties around it in 360 degrees. that is a public health issue. You can read up anything from Jeffrey Donovan, a PhD researcher with the Forest Service, who considers himself more of a public health economist, but all he does is study trees. So that I think is something that is a place where we could push and say, this is why we're doing it. It is for public safety in terms of the climate crisis and trying to make sure that people are not dying when we have too much heat, which we know is going to continue to happen, and also making sure that we have as much of our landscape positively benefiting everybody in a public health and a safety way, rather than removing trees for, you know, ostensibly the same reason, but perhaps misguided.
Benchmark?
Well, I love this conversation. I did maybe bring it up. But I also, of course, I mean, my work has informed me of this, and I think it's so important, is the element of fear. And I think that that is just a very prominent part of this larger conversation that I think is hard. And fear is both a rational and irrational emotion. And so I think when you insert fear into a conversation for many reasons and complexities, it informs. And I think there's things that people really know or think they know related to a building or placement versus a tree, which is a complex living being. So yeah, I think all of these things are intersecting, and I personally spent a lot of time trying to think about this and get the opt-in to trees and then people keeping the trees. But I think as we continue the conversation, let alone think about code and how we're going to move forward with code recommendations and a council that is a new council, I think, to us, let alone the city, around how to approach these and have this conversation. I do think it matters. Because often we're trying to talk about something that we all, I think, care about and understand, and we're trying to help communicate that more broadly. So I think the how we communicate what we are potentially putting forward is really going to matter in this conversation.
Thanks. Good discussion. All right, we're right on track now. So what's the next item? I have my hand up. Oh, I'm sorry.
Final thought for you all. The Urban Forestry Commission is advisory to the city on things related to trees. So if y'all wanted to advise council in any way about the things we were just discussing, there are a number of ways to do that. There is somebody going to testify. There's time at council meetings for that, writing letters, requesting to brief council on it. This is a new council and a new form of government with a lot of different topics on their plates. So there you go, food for thought for you all.
It's a great idea. I mean, you know, it's almost could be sort of a training agenda, you know, that we could have where we have a whole series of things we want to convey, do it over time. Yeah.
And with this particular city council structure, I think the most effective place to testify is in the relevant city council committees, because it seems to be that's where they have discussions. I mean, you can do it before the whole council, but I think we can have more effect at the committee level. I'm not sure, but that's my feeling.
Where most of the public comment periods are gonna be as well. There's more limited opportunities to comment at full city council. The committees are where they're expecting most of the comments, so it's a good point.
Yeah. I do agree with that, and I think we can't take a vote here today for anything, but I would be very happy. I have an article that I'm working on at this moment personally, but I do think that as a advisory body to the city council, to the city, that it would be good of us to say, welcome to your new positions. The political climate right now is a lot about trees, and it would be really nice if I think we took a leadership role in the city to say, let us tell you a little bit about why we're here and why we're doing this, and the kind of larger, I don't want to say theoretical, but the kind of larger fundamental basis of why all of these individual regulations have been put into place. What we're actually, the larger ideal goals that we're working towards as a group.
Why don't we try to have an agenda item hopefully next month on what do we want to convey to council?
Yeah.
How do we want to do it?
I think that's
Who's
great.
gonna do it?
Yeah, we have two items And Claudio's here, but we might have time at the end of this meeting, actually. I
Oh,
think we
great.
may not use our full time, so.
And
maybe
we have
we'll
quorum.
Come back to it.
We
Yeah,
now quorum.
We do
Great.
have five,
Thanks.
so. Great.
All right, great discussion, guys. All right, we're gonna move on to discussion of the 26 budget update statement.
Yep. and we
Yes,
got
that was sent
Claudia.
out.
So Claudio Campazano is with us for this. He is the Vibrant Community Service Area Manager for many things, including finance and budget. Claudio, whenever you're ready.
Sure. Well, thank you all for having me here today. Yep, I am Finance, Property, and Technology Manager for Vibrant Community Support Services, with support parks and the Children's Levy and Arts and Culture. Obviously, with all the change happening, that might change again as of July 1, but we will continue to support parks throughout. So just thank you so much for having me here today. I know a number of you come here probably once or twice a year to talk about things budget. So I really appreciate the opportunity and the time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've just got a quick update on where we are. And let me, do you folks see that? Okay, hang on, I'm doing the sharing. Good. Is that working for folks? All right. So, yeah, just going to talk a little bit about 25, 26 budget. And also, folks, let me know that if it switches to the next slide. Do we have an agenda now? Is that something you're seeing?
Yes.
All right, sweet. So really just want to give you an update on 25, 26 budget. So we're just going to talk a little bit about the projected gap. Give you a little bit of an update on where we are with the renewal of the Parks Levy, budget process next steps, and then sort of dive deeper into the specific recommended reductions in urban forestry. So, so just starting with the projected gap this year, we put together about $23 million. It says reduction, but actually I'll nuance that, gap closing proposals to balance the budget by June 30th, 2026. So it's the end of the Parks Levy. And so it's really looking to make sure that we've got balance in the Parks Levy at the end of 2026. We were projecting a need for about $23 million. The city administrator, we put that budget in at the end of January, and the city administrator put together their draft budget that came out on February 28th. That includes recommendations of $20.7 million of that. So how did we arrive at that number? For those of you that I spoke with last year, part of it actually came from last year's budget. So we were asked to put together a 5% reduction last year to our general fund budget. Our general fund budget is a little under $80 million. And so that guidance came in December of not 2025, 2024, right at the end of the process. And so it was determined at that time that we would absorb that reduction, a general fund reduction within the levy, and that we would look to make those reductions going forward into future years. Then, as we came into this new fiscal year, or going into the next budget year, we were provided a reduction target of 8%. So those two together are what we're solving for in this budget process. So that comes to about $11.4 million of that total $23 million reduction that we were looking at. At the same time, we were also seeing, besides seeing less general fund dollars, we were also seeing less Parks Levy. When we passed the Parks Levy, we had an expectation of what has been historically incredibly consistent and systematic growth in the real estate market in Oregon, or in Portland particularly. And that's largely because of the measures 5 and 47 were put in place back in the 90s. They constrained the growth of real estate taxes, but that also meant that constraint led to very, very consistent uptick of about 3 to 4% every year. So that was more or less what we were counting on. We were not counting on the real estate market that we've been facing, particularly in downtown, which has led to significantly lower collections than we had originally anticipated. So those things all lead to sort of a revenue situation that we needed to address. Simultaneous with that, we were also seeing some pretty significant expense increases. The most significant one is over the first 3 years of the levy, we saw about a 35% increase in the cost per hour worked within the Bureau. And that was really across the board, and that really impacted our projections. That comes to about an 11% annualized growth per year for those 3 years. And that was really a function of some significant PERS increases really that were in response to market conditions, PERS, Public Employee Retirement System, try and keep my acronyms to a minimum. And then also health benefit increases, pretty substantial, and then also a number of labor agreements that were put into place that had significantly higher costs than were anticipated. So that was a big expense driver, as well as what we call an increase in internal service providers. These are the folks that are within the city that Parks as a bureau pays for service. So that includes our technology bureau, our city fleet bureau, our facilities bureau, our risk management bureau, basically our self-insurance group. So a whole variety of costs that increase pretty substantially, and that 19.6% increase is going into next fiscal year. So that really impacted our projection for the next fiscal year. So that really, I just wanted to give a context for sort of what is driving this pretty significant constraint. As we're talking about sort of some of the solutions that we put into place, we did offset some of the reductions that we were proposing with what we're calling a summer buyback, basically keeping 2025 summer harmless in most cases with regard to public programming. The idea there was that we were doing a lot of hiring already back in February for that, and that we wouldn't have decisions made about these gap closing proposals until May, June. And so there wouldn't be time to pivot, and we didn't want to make changes. We didn't want to like reset expectations for the public on that short turnaround. So we did anticipate buying those back regardless. So we, one important thing to note is that we are just part of the larger city budget process. And as that process is continuing, we have been alerted that there are more gaps to close, and so we may not be at the end of gap closing proposals, and so there's definitely more to come and more information to come. So we've been talking about sort of gap closing options. We've been looking mainly at the expense side, reducing expenses, taking cuts to services, et cetera. I do want to note that there's another conversation that is tracking simultaneous with this, which is around a resource conversation, and that's particularly with the Parks Levy. We just mentioned that we've got a new council. They are just getting up to speed on all parks issues, including our challenges, including our resources, et cetera. And so, and we're trying to accelerate that conversation around the successor to the first Parks Levy. So we're looking at a lot of different options, and that's we as staff looking at it with the elected officials. And so looking to renew the Parks Levy at either the existing rate of 80 cents per $1,000 of assessed value or some rate higher than that. If we do go for a rate higher, specifically double, that's the rate that we estimate where we would not need to do any expense side gap closing proposals. So no reduction in services, and that would be a doubling of the levy. So that is an option that's being explored. There's also the option of keeping it at the current rate. That would mean that we would have to go with the reductions that we're looking at right now, and we would have additional gaps to close in future years of at least $27 million is what we're estimating right now. So that really is about a quarter of all of the things that we do with tax resources, whether it be general fund taxes or Parks Levy. So it's not a small impact to services, and we've been trying to articulate that, and really what all we provide a besides urban forestry, multiplicity of services to the public to really convey what that service level impact would look like. Obviously, if not renewed, it would be a pretty substantial reduction. So this is the sort of worst case scenario where we don't, it's either not referred by council, which is unlikely, or not passed by voters, which I believe is also unlikely, is what the polling tells us. But yeah, this would be a pretty cataclysmic impact to the services that we as an organization provide. Up to 50% of those total services. And just to kind of visualize some of that, this is really trying to show, at $1.60, the levy would represent about half of the funding for all of our services, or half of all of our tax funded services. At an 80-cent levy, sort of that's continuing the existing rate. We would be looking at that service reduction in the hash bars, and no levy would, like I said, be about a 50% reduction. And just to kind of like help see that in terms of like just most of our services are provided through people, right? We've got folks in all the different areas, whether it be urban forestry, recreation, land stewardship, in assets and development, doing repairs to our assets. That's how we deliver service. And so really just trying to sort of illustrate sort of what that would mean in terms of in terms of person power at each level. So that's those are the sort of some of the potential resource options that are being explored. Just want to quickly touch on next steps. So this past March and into early April, mayor and city councilors held district listening sessions. So they did one in each district, and those were very highly attended, and there were a lot of folks that were talking about their interest in parks and park services. Now we are in a cycle of council committee sessions. There's both budget work sessions as well as a number of committee sessions that we've been attending and presenting at. On April 2nd, there was a sort of a broad discussion at City Council of the overall draft budget recommendations, with some focus on parks. And we had another session yesterday that was largely a public safety discussion. Moving into May 7th, that is the work session to present the mayor's budget. I'll note that the budget itself is right now, and all this is subject to change. We're hearing this from the city budget office, is expected to come out on the 5th and be discussed on the 7th. This would be the transformation of the city administrator's recommended budget into the mayor's proposed budget. And so that would be sort of taking all of those inputs, including from the public, from this body, from elsewhere, what might be included there. And then we move on to the period between May 7th and June 11th, when the budget would be adopted. We've got a series of committee work sessions, as well as it's mainly committee work sessions, and then leading up to the approval of the budget and then the eventual adoption of the budget. So that's what we're looking at in terms of next steps. And I'll just go to this next slide, which really just covers the proposals that were put forward by Urban Forestry and moved up through the director to the DCA, and eventually what made it through with the city administrators recommended. And that's where this stops. This is not the mayor's proposed, and we don't know what'll be in there until it happens. And so those first couple of bullets you see are the items that are expected to begin July 1. And then I mentioned that summer buyback to make sure that programs that are being planned for the summer continue through the summer. But I'm happy to go through these, or if Brian or Jen want to talk about these, that would also probably get more accurate and more concise information.
Yeah, thanks, Claudio. We briefed the commission on these last month, so you've seen these previously, but I can just do a quick overview of them. I'll just go down the line. So the first one, The first one is a eventual staff reduction. The proposal here is that we utilize the Urban Forestry Fund to retain 6 positions for the next fiscal year. So it would essentially exhaust the full Urban Forestry Fund, but it will allow us to hold on to those staff and allow those staff to potentially find other positions within Urban Forestry or the city. It would also give time to see what happens with the levy renewal, if some of them could be retained, the renewal passes. So that's what is included in that proposal. I just want to note that that is a reduction. It is an eventual reduction of general fund. And it does mean if after the next fiscal year, those positions would not have the funding to continue. And those would be in our tree maintenance operations group and our permitting and regulation group. The next one is not a reduction, but looking to increase program revenue through increased staff time committed to capital improvement projects, because those staff bill their time to that project. And then NPUPs are non-parks use permits. So when non-city organizations need to access park property like PGE for utility upgrades, Urban Forestry staff have a role in ensuring trees are not damaged. But Urban Forestry doesn't receive any revenue from that time, so it's staff time being spent on that. So it would be looking at capturing more revenue from that process. The next one is, this one is, as I mentioned last month, uncertain. It was to have one of our staff paid for by the IRA grant that Urban Forestry received as part of the coalition that Friends of Trees is leading, and Friends of Trees secured that $12 million grant in partnership with the city, but many other partners as well. Obviously, there's some uncertainty around that funding source right now. So without that IRA grant, this would add an additional staff reduction to the proposal, unless we're able to identify a different cut to cover that. The next few are essentially reducing internal services, some of our staff training opportunities, material supplies, fleet costs. So this is just sort of like across our operation, finding reductions wherever we can. The credit card fees one does stand out as an easy one, because those are the fees that Urban Forestry paid to accept credit card payments for permit fee applications. Since we're reducing or have eliminated our fees for permits, we won't have those credit card processing fees. So that's one of the only easy cuts on this list. And then lastly, this is the summer buyback that Claudio mentioned. So some of our community stewardship positions that are on the reduction list, those positions would be extended through the summer to support summer specific programming. But as of September 1st, those positions would be eliminated as well. So total of 1.5 billion across Urban Forestry. None of these are easy to take, really significant impacts to staff, of course, to the programs that we offer to the community that is benefiting from these programs. So these are, as Claudio said, what were in the city administrator's draft budget. We await to see what the mayor proposes.
Great. So that was all that I had, but happy to take questions. I'll leave the slideshow up in case anybody wants to back up and discuss anything in particular.
And then I'll just note before we have questions that there was a draft statement for the UFC to approve today. Edit, of course, first as fit, and then that can be submitted as part of both Urban Forestry's advice on these budget proposals, but also recommending renewal of the parks levy.
I have a question. PSEF funding, that's not part of the general fund, but it is part of Urban Forestry budget. And unclear as to whether city council thinks they can actually greatly modify how that's used for the fiscal year 25-26, because that could greatly affect staffing and programs at urban forestry. And I'll just ask for your response. I'm confused as to how you're gonna deal with that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And so as a reminder, about $7 million of what was general fund and levy funded activities in urban forestry are now funded by PSEF. That was a decision that council made last year. And that was in sort of citywide. So the PSEF staff in BPS working with the city budget office, reviewing the constraints of that funding source and making recommendations to council around that opportunity to swap out funding and preserve services. So I'm sure that that conversation continues, and that is one of the things that I expect them, and when I say them, the mayor and the city budget office and eventually the city council would be included in that conversation after the proposed comes out, to the degree that there's other opportunities for PSEF stepping in to substitute for general fund and levy and fill those gaps that could preserve services. But that's something that it's not a funding source that I am intimately familiar with the constraints on it, nor so it's really managed by BPS and the city budget office, and so that's sort of a higher level conversation about how it might serve as a resource to backfill issues in parks or elsewhere. So that may not be a satisfying answer, but does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's scary because what percentage of urban forestry's current budget for the is coming from PSEF?
Yeah. I don't know exactly off the top of my head. I would say that none of the specific allocations from PSEF to urban forestry that are in the climate investment plan, so that's like tree canopy, tree protection care, which includes tree maintenance, none of those are proposed for reduction right now, since the reduction is specific to the general fund. So those have not been proposed to be changed. Those are continuing forward, those are allocated. So those are safe for the moment. I'm not sure of the exact percentage of that makes up our entire budget. But I can definitely see if I can figure that out.
If it's 7 million a year from one allocation and the street trees is 65 over 5 years, that's 13, so that's 20 million a year. And what's the rest of your budget currently?
I mean, I think our annual budget right now is around 20 million, but it doesn't work out as cleanly as just dividing those 5 year by 5
Yeah,
because it's
yeah,
their phase, so it's a bit more complicated.
But
Yeah,
I guess my point is potentially it's a huge amount of money that could be threatened.
I totally understand that sense. I would actually say that in many ways, the new services that are being funded through PSEF that have been identified over the last couple of years actually are somewhat safer, PSEF being a more stable revenue source at this point. So I think that there is the larger question about if there's any thinking at a higher level around reallocating PSEF to address larger citywide issues, and that's not a conversation I've heard too much about. So in the current environment, I would say that PSEF is actually a safer resource to have funding your services than general fund and levy at this point.
Thank you.
Benchmark?
I have two questions. One is just, I'm curious, beyond the IRA grant, which I am intimately familiar with, other just implications of loss of federal funding and or kind of potential loss of federal funding that may be channeled through the county that comes to you all, or however the state, whatever it may be. So I am curious about this. And the second part I say with no insult to anyone, but I just know when personnel is often your biggest cost as someone that has to navigate this. Our I don't know the implication of city requirements or union requirements, so I will speak my naivete, but sometimes in the nonprofit and business world, there are implications to freezing salaries of your higher paid employees to help equitably not have to impact lower paid employees more. So I'm just curious more broadly if there are creative systems. I'm not trying to say people don't deserve raises. I'm not trying to say that, but I'm just trying to
No.
think of like creative solutions that maybe might hit those least financially vulnerable.
100%. And you know, I don't think it's anything you need to tiptoe around or like, I'm a cold-blooded finance guy. I'll take savings where I can get it now. But no, in all seriousness, that those are actually, I'm sure, things that are being explored. Um, it's not something that we as parks can do on our own. That way, you know, there's a whole host of sort of issues around individual bureaus pursuing those types of solutions on their own. So they do need to be managed at a citywide level. I would not be surprised if there was some kind of either wage freeze or furlough or some kind of citywide solutions that were put in place as part of the proposed or beyond to close final gaps. You know, it's one of those things that we would count on city budget office to work with the Bureau of Human Resources, to work with the mayor to figure out what what's the appetite, if there's labor implications, how those would work out, and make sure that they're having those conversations on a holistic citywide level. And that's, they bring us in if they need us. But right now we're in a pretty they keep a pretty close hold on decision making at this point until the proposed comes out.
Thanks. I want to transition us to the draft letter that was sent out, and so wonder if folks had a chance to read it and just make sure we only have a few minutes left for this agenda item. Make sure we have a plan for getting something out the door that everyone can agree to. So what's the time frame on
Submitting that.
submitting?
Yeah, we would want to approve it today if the commission wants to submit it. And just a reminder, I included support for city council referring the levy renewal at the increased rate to the November ballot. That was something the commission received a briefing on in a special meeting in January and voted, I think, in February to submit that statement. So that's why the letter includes
Great.
both of those.
Excellent. Okay, any thoughts on the letter, discussion?
I would I wish the wording was a little more vague. UFC supports moving the levy to the November ballot. I understand why the 160 is requested. I'm just not sure yet if I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But we need a levy renewal. The amount is what I'm not sure on, even though the information was presented.
Yeah.
It's a big increase.
It could be reworded to simply say refer renewal and more broad language around ensuring no additional cuts to parks programming. Maybe not make it specific to that tax rate, but more about the maintaining the level of service.
Yeah, I would prefer that, but if my fellow commissioners really think we need to say the 160, that's their prerogative.
Thoughts from others? Okay, sees a thumbs up. Commissioner Vandermark.
So the only thing I don't have, I think I'm open to naming the rate or not, so I would defer to others on that one. I might just add a comment maybe to our earlier conversation to talk about the larger funding environment. It's not just about the city's current it's not about the current budget crisis. We are functionally operating in a disinvestment in government dollars that I think are gonna have larger downstream implications. So I don't know how to say that succinctly, aside from saying like, and in a larger context of reduced funding opportunities, I think it might, this is one potential opportunity to continue to provide funding when I think areas of funding seem to just be disappearing.
Okay, I think time is of the essence for this. I know the Parks Board got a letter in already. So, you know, with these meetings happening imminently, I would recommend that we, you know, don't have the perfect, not, you know, threaten the good type of thing. So, yeah, is there a motion? And I'm fine either way. I think really specifying the amount versus maintaining services.
Yeah,
It
think
sort of
that's fine.
says the same thing, so yeah, I'd be fine changing it to
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. It's the UFC focusing on the outcome and the service being provided, less about the mechanics of how we get there. So I think that's a perfectly good change.
So is there a motion before to approve letter?
In the interest of time, I'll move to approve the letter as written.
Yeah, I'm happy to second that.
All in favor?
Great.
Great, I think that's everybody, so I assume there's no no's or abstentions, okay,
I'll abstain. I'm abstaining.
you're abstaining, okay.
Great, thanks everyone. We'll get that submitted this week. And I did want to note, Commissioner Vandermark had a note about reductions in federal funding and the impacts of those. Something that I forgot to submit to include in our Foresters report today is an update on that. You may recall over a year and a half ago, Urban Forestry was awarded a FEMA grant for $2 million for tree planting. Our proposal was actually included in President Biden's announcement of those grants. It was one of the 5 projects that was featured. We did receive word last week that grant award has been canceled. The entire program, the entire FEMA building resilience program was canceled. We were expecting that, to be honest, after not receiving the award for the last few months. There was another bureau in the city received an award under that program as well. I forget, I think it might have been a water bureau program. And several projects across Oregon were funded through that as well. So more reductions in federal support, which does obviously place greater burden on local sources sustaining this work. So wanted to report that to you all.
Okay, well, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia.
Yeah, thanks so much, Claudia.
Great, thank you all. Take care.
Moving on to the next item, code alignment project briefing.
Yes. Mika Keenan is here with us today. So I'll just do a quick intro, then turn over to Mika for the presentation. So this is a code amendment project that is looking at aligning the different thresholds the city uses for triggering upgrades to public amenities in a development process. So Urban Forestry has been involved from the start. There's several bureaus involved in this work, and Mika is the project manager on it. So there are some Title 11 implications to this. So Mika's going to give us an overview that we can talk specifically about what the Title 11 changes could be through this.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. And thank you all for giving this project time on your agenda today. Again, my name is Mika Keenan, and I am a project manager on the permit improvement team. And the permit improvement team is not situated within any one bureau. We are in the community and economic development service area. So we are focused on improving the permit processes across the development bureaus that are involved with permitting development. So with that, I'm just going to give us a little bit of an introduction, and then I'm just going to jump right into it. So this project has been a collaboration across 4 bureaus, including transportation, parks, urban forestry, planning and sustainability, and permitting and development. So although the permit improvement team, my position, has served as the project managers for this effort, the real work in innovative thinking and heavy lifting has come from the staff members on the project team who are responsible for writing and implementing the amendments. This project represents a new way of coming together to develop policy. As a team of policy writers and policy implementers, we have asked staff to work differently on this project to take the gathered stakeholder feedback and be adaptive and responsive as we learn from each other and from our varied perspectives and objectives. So rather than having one bureau working on one code, it's really a joint effort across multiple bureaus to look at multiple codes. And we'll get into more of the details of that. So the origin story for this, the permit improvement team, as I mentioned, is focused on improving permitting outcomes for our customers across the bureaus. And from the beginning of this project, which started with the Permit Improvement Task Force, we've heard that our codes are not well integrated and that for sustained long-term permit efficiency, we need to address this problem. This theme has been communicated in multiple sources and by various stakeholders, including auditors' reports, customer surveys, staff surveys, and numerous meetings that the permit improvement team take part in, both in a public sector as well as, with city leadership. And one theme that is consistent is that we can really only be as good as our codes. So the project really contains two kind of packages. One is a small code amendment package, which is relatively small in scope, so that we could be timely in our response to customers and staff concerns and leverage the capacity of the permit improvement team, which is a limited term team. So we did want to keep our amendments relatively narrow. They're intended to be more technical in nature and provide immediate relief to the development community, as well as be responsive to customers while setting the stage for deeper discussions on addressing some of the larger policy challenges. So this is a list of all of the folks who are involved in this initiative. You see our sponsor is Donnie Oliveira, our DCA, and Terry and Stephen are part of our direct leadership team. And also we are partnering with BPS on this work. The project team includes staff from the policy bureaus, as well as the implementation folks in PP&D. So you'll see a really good cross section here of staff. We have code compliance, public works, public infrastructure review, engineering plan review, and land use review, all coming together to work on identifying issues across bureaus that our customers and staff face on a day-to-day basis, and really bringing this really rich combination of ideas and thoughts and perspectives into how we can solution some of these problems. So we started with a list of about 100 issues that were gathered both from customers and from staff. And we got everybody together and we said, okay, out of this list of 100 items, what do we need to address? What makes the most sense given our scope of work to focus on a small amendment package in a short amount of time? What are some things that we could What are some things we could address? And what quickly rose to the surface was the need to address the upgrade cost thresholds. So upgrade cost thresholds are city-imposed requirements. So when an applicant comes in to do an alteration to their building, a new construction or an addition, if they reach a certain cost threshold, the city asks them to do additional improvements with our infrastructure. So we see these cost thresholds throughout our codes and administrative rules. We see them in Title 11, Title 17, which is our street improvements, Title 24, which is our local building code, and Title 33, our zoning code, all have thresholds based on cost and project value. This is challenging for a lot of reasons. Often staff and customers disagree on what the project value is. So what we see is that customers will build just to the thresholds so that they don't trigger all of these requirements. So there's, people try to get around doing these upgrades. So there's often a lot of back and forth with staff and customers on how much a project costs. This is also not a great model. What we learned from doing research is that other jurisdictions don't use a cost threshold typically to trigger infrastructure improvements. It's more typically based on work proposed. And ours are complicated because they're different for each code, because they're somewhat buried in our rules. They're typically a surprise to applicants and lead to significant increases in project costs and permit expenses. They have to have more plans created. That means more plans reviewed, more opportunities to need to submit new plans and do re-reviews. And what we have also found is that the city imposed requirement can often outsize the proposed project. So we're asking them for a lot based on, a relatively small building improvement. So the intended amendment outcomes are to right size requirements for small businesses and small scale development types. So that's really the lens that we used when we approached this work, or who do we want to benefit most from whatever it is that we propose. We wanted to address some of the issues that we heard involving lack of transparency and predictability, so that applicants can better anticipate the costs and time for their project before they come in for permitting, establish a consistent methodology, ideally across our codes, and also just to simplify the process, simplify our permitting process, and also simplify our cost thresholds process. So again, we are focusing on these 4 codes: street tree planting, seismic evaluation for Title 24, our building code, non-conforming site upgrades, also known just as non-conforming upgrades in Title 33, and also frontage improvements. So this is a small sample of thresholds that are in our codes. It's by no means all of them, but these were kind of the biggest pain points that we heard from staff and from customers. So this table represents what some of the code challenges are, I would say, for our customers. It includes the cost thresholds for these different codes, and you can see by these circles, they're all a little different. So street improvements are based on, for significant alterations, I should say, are based on a project value. If the project value is greater than 35% of the improvement value, street trees has a $25,000 threshold, $362,000 for seismic evaluations, $356,000 for Title 33. Some of them go up every year, some of them don't. Some of them have exclusions, some of them don't. Some of them are the same. They're often different. Sometimes there's a max, there's a cap put on the improvement requirement, and sometimes there's not. So, if this looks really confusing and complicated, it is. We could probably spend an hour just deciphering what all of these are, so you can imagine how challenging it is for applicants to understand them, and then figure out how they apply to their particular project. Staff also has to spend a significant amount of time trying to help customers understand these different requirements. So here is our proposal, and one thing that I would want to say before we got to this point, this group of policy writers and implementation staff tried a couple different ideas on how we could begin to align these thresholds. One was moving to a square footage threshold. And once we really started trying to come up with a long-term solution, what they found was that it got pretty complicated very quickly. And they felt like they really needed more time to do, to do the code work and the due diligence that was needed to come up with a long-term solution. One of the biggest pieces that they identified was we really need to work with our customers more and have an opportunity to do a larger, stakeholder engagement to come up with a longer term solution. So the proposal that we are working with right now is to suspend these thresholds until 2029. You will see that there's two changes, one for street trees, which Brian is going to talk to, and then one for the significant alterations and adding a new construction threshold. So we picked up this 2029 date, if you're wondering, from an existing suspension for non-conforming upgrades. So as part of the Housing Regulatory Relief Program, non-conforming upgrades were suspended for any project that includes residential. So through conversations, an idea emerged that we could do a temporary suspension of these other thresholds until 2029, which would give the bureaus time to really do that outreach, do a deeper analysis of the data, and come up with a more long-term solution. So I'm going to hand it over to Brian, who is going to talk specifically about the Title 11 proposal.
Thanks, Mika. And I'll note too, Dan Gleason with our permitting and regulation team is here today to help answer questions. He's been a really important part of this project throughout it. So I appreciate his support on this, and he's here to answer questions more on the technical side of things. So the change we're proposing here is under the current Title 11, any development permit with a value of over $25,000 triggers a street tree planting requirement. So that can be new construction, housing's getting built, or an addition or an alteration. And an example of a alteration could be commercial tenant space. A new tenant is moving in and there's some interior work being done. Maybe it's a new office layout, so there's internal partitions being made, walls going up. No outside work, no ground disturbance, nothing impacting the right of way. But if it's valued more than $25,000, it triggers a street tree requirement. And what's involved in that is the applicant submits a tree plan. They have to identify all the existing trees, either on site or the street trees. There's a review fee, which is around $600 to $700 for the applicant. And then Urban Forestry, well now not Urban Forestry, Portland Permitting and Development goes out to identify, is there a potential location for a new street tree to be planted? We have found that only about 10 to 15% of those cases is a new tree planted. So we have a significant percentage where these applicants are paying a fee. The review is happening. They may be hiring a landscape architect or an arborist to do that tree plant for them. But then no street tree is actually getting planted because there isn't space. There's existing street trees. So we view this as an opportunity to streamline that. The other issue here is that that $25,000 threshold has not been updated since 1990. I think it's actually 1996. So obviously, what $25,000 buys you over that time has decreased quite a bit. And so it's starting to capture projects, much smaller projects than it originally was envisioned to be. So relatively minor changes to, it could be a basement kitchen, or it could be a minor bathroom remodel could now trigger a street tree planting. It's not really the original intention of it. So what we're proposing is to keep the street tree planting requirement for new construction. That will continue. But then for additions and alterations, along with some of these other requirements, it would be suspended until 2029. So that's about a 5-year suspension of those. One important caveat is if frontage improvements, if street improvements are required as part of the project, so a major addition could trigger a full sidewalk rebuild, which would allow for tree wells and new planting spaces. If that happens, there would still be a street tree planting requirement. So that ensures that some of these larger projects are still planting street trees, but the smaller ones are not. We did look at some of the data over the last few years. It's been an average of around 450 street trees a year planted through the additions and the alterations. Going forward, we would expect far fewer if this continued because development activity has decreased quite a bit. We also have much more funding for street tree planting than we did in the past. And so the Title 11 trigger is less of a sort of important part of how we get street trees planted because of PSEF equitable tree canopy coming online. So that's some of the reasons that we're supportive of this for the next few years while we work to align this trigger with some of the other ones in the city.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
I have 2 more slides that I'll just run through, and then we'll take questions. So early feedback, we have reviewed this proposal with NIOP and BOMA and BRAC, which are 2 standing committee meetings at the city. And also from, presenting this and reviewing it with some of our internal stakeholders has been very positive. They feel like it could be really beneficial for creating opportunities for development. One person said they have customers now who are, at risk of losing their buildings because they can't afford to move forward because of all of these thresholds. So it does sound like this is going to provide some of that relief. We are doing more outreach over the next couple of weeks. This was just early feedback from internal stakeholders. So our brief timeline here, the code and admin rule edits have been submitted and we're reading through those and making minor changes. That concept will be posted on the code alignment project website by next week. We are, still making those little changes. As I mentioned, we will be holding stakeholder meetings through the end of the month. And this is just a briefing for the Urban Forestry Commission for you all, and the public hearing is currently set for May 15th. Then it will move on to a public hearing for the Planning Commission in June. Then we need to go to Council Committee, and we are hoping that this makes it in front of Council in July or August, and they will review all 4 of the code change proposals. And that concludes my presentation, and I'll back up to this slide and open it up for questions.
Mr. Nelson.
I don't see if there needs to be more time for the different bureaus to figure out the long-term approach rather than giving up the revenues and the trees that would happen over the next 4 years. Why don't you just keep the existing procedures and then the new regulations will be worked on? Why is it the city needs to sacrifice so the developers can reduce their time or costs?
Do you want me to start with that one, Brian, or do you want to start?
Sure, yeah, you start, then I can add after that.
Well, when we started this project back in November, you'll remember that because we were addressing this in a new way, and there is a lot of change happening with the city in terms of how our government is being configured, we knew that we were going to have to be adaptable, and our economic climate has been one that has, significantly changed since we started this project. And the reality is that we're not seeing development happening downtown. really at all. We're seeing development happening in surrounding cities, and Portland has, gained a reputation for being very unfriendly to developers, right? And small businesses. Our small businesses are leaving the city. Large businesses are leaving the city. So we're seeing a decline pretty significantly in property values downtown, which is part of the reason we're in the economic crisis that we're in. So this is a way to help support small businesses so that they can reopen that store that they want, so that they can do that remodel, and so that we can have a friendlier approach to, stimulating business activity. We're not, if we're probably not going to see a lot of development in the next couple of years anyways. That's what our projections show. It doesn't show that we are increasing development. So, we're not going to get these improvements if we don't have the development anyways, right? These are all imposed when somebody comes in to build, and people have been showing that they're not building right now.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't really add much to that. I think that's exactly right. And I would just note that the budget deficit that we're experiencing right now, Claudio mentioned the parks levy bringing in less revenue than originally and anticipated, the general fund obviously as well. Those are all reductions to property tax increases, which have historically been very stable. And so these types of improvements that property owners would be doing, those improve the value of properties and increase the tax collection from those. So this is a way of trying to stimulate that kind of activity that will help stabilize some of these issues.
Commissioner Platt?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the presentation. I was aware that these sorts of things were coming down, and I have two questions that I want to ask. One is, do we know how much it's costing these small businesses? This has been something that was brought up at the state level sometime last year about trying to reduce the environmental regulations around new development or any development at all, with the idea that somehow saves any significant money compared to the rest of the cost of everything. So, Brian, do you know how much this costs any individual business owner, property owner, anyone who has to plant a tree right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. It varies so significantly. The review is around $650, and then it really depends on the cost of submitting a tree plan, how many trees they have to plant. So I think it's both potential complexity and cost. It's just one more requirement to add onto this. So it can be a few. I would say typically in the range of a few $1,000s.
Okay.
Obviously that kind of falls more heavily on if it's an individual property owner doing a residential remodel, a little bit different than a commercial tenant. But I would say probably like a couple $1,000s. It's most likely the least expensive of everything on this list.
And that's kind of that's what I'm leading towards, is that there's all these other things. Is the Water Bureau saying you don't need to, we're going to reduce this water regulation? Is the PBOT reducing their regulations to help this out? Or did the city kind of look around and say, okay, like normal, let's cut the trees first. That's the easiest thing that we can get rid of, when really it's not going to gain a whole lot. Is it the trees that have been stopping development in the city? Is that what this kind of sounds like to me? Yeah,
Mika, I can respond first, and I'm sure you'll have something to add to there, but I definitely appreciate that perspective, Casey. I think all these bureaus came together on this to see like what can we feel like we can live with. I agree the trees part is a smaller part of it than most. Other bureaus are giving up these sort of outcomes that we want. These are all these upgrades are for either improving public safety or improving the services to the public that comes along with some of these development activities. So yeah, ours are definitely lower cost, but I would say like other bureaus are trying to contribute to this as well, and PBOT in particular with some of the frontage improvement requirements. It is definitely I think it's a reflection of this sort of new reality that Portland is in, and trying to be responsive with that. And just recognizing that we're just not in an economic environment where we can get everything that we want out of these projects right now.
Okay.
And that it's, thankfully, we have other resources like PSAF to help us get good street tree planting improvements, while we may not be getting them out of development as much as we have in the past.
Thank you, Brian. And we're not proposing to change any of the requirements on private property. This is really only related to the street trees. And just to build on what the other bureaus are, I guess, giving up, for lack of a better word, significant alterations for street frontage improvements. So this would eliminate the need for small businesses to do sidewalk, curb, and ADA ramp improvements if the valuation of their project hits a certain threshold. So that, again, that is something that other jurisdictions don't do. They usually just require frontage improvements if it increases trips, right? If there's a number, if there's an increase in trips to a property. We also have this added requirement of, well, if you're investing this dollar amount of money into your property, you also have to improve your sidewalk. So they're suspending the significant alterations threshold to do a reevaluation. However, the increase in trips will stay. And there's a couple caveats there. So schools and hospitals will continue to require frontage improvements, which is why Urban Forestry said, well, hey, if you are going to get frontage improvements through trip increases or through these institutional uses, we want to ensure that we're maintaining space to plant trees. So that's street trees. Seismic evaluation is also included, as is Title 33 non-conforming upgrades, which is substantial. It's a substantial pause.
Okay. Well, I want to add one other idea that had come from my time working at the city doing development projects, and that is seeing if the city could almost meet it halfway rather than getting rid of, these fees outright, doing something more akin to what the Water Bureau does, where you're not allowed to touch the water pipes in the city of Portland unless you are the Water Bureau. So they basically say you need to make all these marks on the plan to say exactly where it's going to go and how it's going to connect, but we will do all of the work. So I wonder if the city could, Urban Forestry specifically, or anyone who's working with trees now in the planning development zone or area, if that could be a model that we could go for, because they could do the work in the sense of mark on the plan where you will build this tree well, and that's all you need to do. Urban Forestry will then go in and plant the tree, and we will be the only ones to mess with it. So as we are moving towards maintaining and managing all of our trees, that model seems to me to be meeting them halfway, where there's still a requirement that a tree must be planted throughout all these different things. But instead of getting rid of it outright, we say we'll do the hard work of the planting, the tree selection, the actual labor of getting a tree in the place. However, we need you to mark down exactly where that's going to be, and we'll work with you to make sure we do that. So essentially just copying the Water Bureau's model of show us what we're requiring you to do, and then we'll do it.
Casey. So guys, I see Commissioner Vandermark's hand is up. We're kind of out of time for this, but how about just a quick?
Well, I feel like there is about to be a response to Casey, so I don't want to cut that off.
Yeah,
I
we do
was-
have
I was just going to
minutes. I
say,
mean,
I was just going to say thank you, Casey, for that. I think that that is a really good observation. And I think that that is something that the bureaus want to explore. And I think that customers would like that as well. I know in the past, PBOT has tried to craft a program where developers could just write a check for the work and the city does it. I think people would be really happy to do that. So, and I don't, I can't speak for trees as well, but it seems like having Urban Forestry's expertise in the tree planting and maintenance makes a lot of very good sense. So that could be something that is explored during this pause.
thank you very much.
Great, I see a couple more hands, or
Well,
Commissioner
Daniel,
Vandermark?
did you have a response to that? I don't like to like throw off my next sideways comment if there's a response to the standing comment.
No, I think, yeah, that Mika addressed in noting that, looking into the long-term future of plans, I think is really important. I think, we're looking at this project is what's going to be able to put into place right now, and specifically not as much as how the mechanism which trees are getting planted, but the situations in which they're being required, which right now is oftentimes interior only, which don't engage with any aspect of the right of way, except for where the tree planting is coming in.
Well, that transitions well actually to my question, which is related to, I'm just trying to, I mean, I'm not a finance person, I just have to do it as part of my job. But I'm curious about the equivalency of $25,000 in 1990 to now, because I am trying to understand that. And like, I love trees, y'all. I've dedicated my profession to it. But sometimes if you just want to improve your bathroom, I could understand why somebody is like, or I just put in new kitchen cabinets. What like so I'm just trying to understand what is the equivalency in today dollars. I'm trying to understand that and kind of the intent of I'm thinking more residentially, but like making that connection. So I'm just trying to understand that.
Yeah, I think we did look at that at the start of the project. I want to say it was around $70,000. Would be the $25,000 in today. The other challenge with the dollar amount threshold, because that was one of the first we looked at. Do we just update the dollar amount? But when you put a dollar amount in code, it doesn't change. That means you do a code amendment. So every year it loses a little bit. So even just updating it to say $70,000 right now would still kind of perpetuate this. And then exactly, we lose that kind of like nexus to the work being done. You're doing a work entirely. I mean, kitchen remodels can easily hit $67,000 right now, and you're doing all the work inside the house, and the only thing happening outside is the street tree requirement. And so that's part of this idea of like aligning all these different upgrades the city's requiring. That's why we moved away from this sort of dollar amount part.
Hey, thanks, great discussion. I'm gonna move us on to an annual report review and approval. And again, you got a separate email with those attached. There's an older one, and then there are several newer ones that are shorter and a more consistent format. So what we'd like to do is have you guys review and approve the existing ones, modifications if needed, and maybe some comments on what your thoughts are going forward. Are folks okay with a shorter, more sort of systematic version, so we could be timely about getting these out? It's been very delayed. Any comments on them?
Yeah, I can comment on it. I do think that as a volunteer body, all of us are busy doing other things, and I appreciate all of the work, especially in the 2021 one. It's a very effective visual piece, and so it's nice to look at it, and you get a really good, very rich understanding of what we're doing. I would love to do that, but I would not want to push us towards something that I myself wouldn't be like, I can help do that. And at this moment, I would not be good at helping write these reports. So it makes me lamentably say, yes, I like the second. It seems to me that the second kind of more concise version is more effective in terms of timeliness for a volunteer body that is also made up of people who are very full otherwise.
Other thoughts, comments, Commissioner Vandermark?
Well, and I just wanted to give, I mean, of course, I want to give a lot of credit to Bruce and just I like the linking. I know this is a comment I'd made in a prior one. We take extensive meeting notes. We also now have recorded meetings. So I do think there's access to fuller information in our current era. At the same time, I think, of course, it's really nice to have that concise summary, but I like the ability for those individuals that want to dive deeper to be directed to how they can do so. I think that's just a really viable way to try to, almost to what Casey was saying, to thread the needle of that fuller report while also less capacity.
I have extensive remarks, but you can throw them all away if you'd like. I believe the shorter form should always list the names of the urban forestry commissioners for that particular year. Choose some sort of arbitrary date and who were the commissioners at that time. My perspective is always is coming from how will history view these documents? How useful will these be 10 years from now in documenting what we did or did not do? So I think it's important that you have the names of the commissioners. I'm not sure about how links will be available in the future, 10 years from now. That's something that I'll explore at Portland Archives when I go there after this meeting, but I don't know. The documents that are linked to are really important as part of the record, and I don't know if they'll be lost when there are, quote, upgrades to the web and URL addresses. Are those documents still available? Because those are an important part of the report. Let's see, on the 2022 specifically, when I looked through my notes for 2022, there was extensive discussions on, there was interest in how our agendas set. Not necessarily pleasure with how agendas were set. That's not mentioned in the final report. There was concern, 2022 was the year that we spent a fair amount of time at different meetings. In total, maybe it wasn't more than an hour or two or three, but there was concern about the tree planting controversy between Urban Forestry, Bureau of Environmental Services, Friends of Trees. There's no mention of that in the report. In 2023, this was the year that we spent a lot of time on heritage tree number 26. There is absolutely no mention of that discussion, some of the issues at play, absolutely no mention at all, which I'd like to say it's an oversight, but I think that was an important part of what happened that year. There has never been so much time spent on one issue by the Urban Forestry, and that's an exaggeration. I found sounding trumpet. We spent a lot of time on discussing that tree. Also, there was discussion on the community agreements. We didn't come to agreement. We didn't finalize that, but there was discussion, and I think that was a fairly important discussion item in 2023. There's no mention of that. Also, I would say 2023 reads more like a report from the Urban Forestry than from the Urban Forestry Commission. Those are my sentiments. I think a shorter report, I can see that. I know when I did mine, it probably took me, I don't know, we'll say 20 to 40 hours and probably $1,000 each. And that's not what people normally are going to want to do. So, but I also think it is a report of the Urban Forestry Commission, and in the past, I believe it has always been done by members of the Urban Forestry Commission. I don't know what is different about these times that makes volunteers on the Urban Forestry Commission unable to do the report. So, but those are my comments.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Bruce. I drop into the chat what Title 11 requires for the report. So it is intended to be a pretty high level overview of the concerns. that have been brought by city bureaus and the city forester to the commission, with the idea that that's primarily where the agenda items are coming from. And then the report will include evaluation of the opportunities and barriers to the effective management of your forest. So it's not meant to be an exhaustive inventory of all discussions or topics. It is meant to be more high level. So that's, I will say that as staff trying to get us caught up, trying to keep it pretty narrow to what we had the capacity to do. It's the UFC's report. It's your report, and so please feel free to edit, make additions, cover topics that are not covered. Absolutely. I just want to note from sort of a getting caught up with the backlog that we had, I definitely approached it as meeting the requirements of code and that's definitely not being exhaustive, but all those are important things that were discussed each of those years. So if there is capacity within the commission to make additions, all for it. This is your report to approve at the end of this.
So, yeah, I'm kind of with Megan in that I really appreciate your interest in this and the energy you put into it. And, you know, one thought that I had was, or, you know, request would be, would you like to kind of be the first reviewer of these while you're on the commission? I mean, maybe there's someone else interested in it too, one or two folks who could be sort of first reviewers, so we could get a draft. So it's done by staff, so it could be timely, and then have like a first reviewer where you add in some of these key things. And then it comes to the overall commission.
That's fine. I'm only here 2 more years, so
Okay.
that's a short-term solution.
2 years is pretty good. Commissioner Clark.
Yeah, one possibility in terms of kind of addressing that would be, well, 2 things. One, including the minutes, the approved minutes, which per year we have 12, generally speaking, and those could be added on as appendices. But it also could be something that that we bring up as an agenda item and say, for the next half hour, 45 minutes, we are going to discuss what we would like to see as a group on the on this year's, or on last year's report. That way we as a commission could say, here are the big issues that we want to reflect on the report from our group, and then direct staff to say, please write up a summary of these and include that, and then we can also as a group review it as well. So that way we can I don't know, most do it all, but also have it be written by a professional writer like Mr. Manager Brian.
Yeah, that's a nice suggestion, Casey. Okay,
And
well,
sorry, the
that's
last
fine.
thing I wanted to note is that I think that addresses one big issue that I think is very particular to Bruce right now, for things that we should be very thankful for, which is going through the record of all of the Urban Forestry Commission since its induction. So for historians that are doing that kind of work, having a thorough and complete review of what happened is very helpful for antiquity, for posterity, whichever one is not your butt.
Names are different.
All right, well, so I'm hearing, a potential plan for going forward, which is a shortened report that meets the requirements, that's done timely. Where we have an agenda item where we ask commissioners what we think are the most important items to cover. It gets drafted by Brian, gets reviewed first by Bruce for maybe any details, and if anyone else wants to join that, kind of a pre-review, that would be great, and then it's brought to us. Does that sound reasonable? We need to vote on it, but. So then the question is, though, for these on the table, I mean, the bullets that you brought up sounded reasonable to me to include. I don't know about what others feel, or if you want to go ahead and approve them as is, or approve them with modifications. I hate to spend more time to bring them back, because we have a lot of lot of stuff to work on. Thoughts on process on that?
I personally agree with Bruce in that there are some big issues that I think should be included per his notes. And I also agree that we should have a list of everybody who was on it at the time making these decisions. I think that's a very important thing to add on. So I would, at this stage, just in the light of moving forward with these and then hopefully making changes to the 2024 that's more substantive per what we all desire, that we could approve these with changes per what Bruce has suggested, and then be able to move these forward and kind of recorrect ourselves towards something that's a little bit more rich and meaningful, but perhaps not as what it used to be. So kind of try to find the middle ground where we can.
Is that a motion? Is there a second?
I'll second what Casey said.
Okay, all in
You have to
favor?
repeat it.
All in favor? Okay, great. Oh,
I think he's voting.
I think he was voting. Okay. What
Yeah,
was that?
that's my vote.
Okay, great, thanks, the JR. Okay, I think we're set, because I think everyone voted, so I don't think there's any no's or yeah, abstentions, great. So that's great, so we have 7 minutes left. We could either adjourn early, or you had brought up the possibility of talking about what do we want to do with the current city council and how to organize it.
Yeah, folks want to continue that discussion of submitting as part of the advisory role of the commission, submitting comments to city council to a specific committee, just around the way that trees are managed or treated or viewed as inconsistent with how other infrastructure is. That's up to the commission if they want to continue that.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe we're gonna finish in 7 minutes,
Yeah.
but maybe we could start the conversation. Commissioner Van Mark?
Well, I love the idea, and I feel like this could be a topic of an entire substantial part of a future commission meeting, and maybe one where more of us are present.
Yeah.
Because drafting something like this will take time. We kind of have a non-functioning policy committee, so I just wonder, yeah, can this be a future topic so we can have a more substantive discussion?
Yeah, yeah. Any other thoughts?
I agree definitely that this could be a longer discussion. But if I was to have something, or just to suggest things that I would include in a letter, what we want to convey, it would be for the Urban Forestry Commission, what it is we do in our power and responsibility. Vivek Shandas did a review of, or did a survey and found that most Portlanders believe the UFC has the most power in terms of the urban forest kind of apparatus here. And that's simply not true. We're an advisory body, as is noted. So we don't really direct policy, so to speak, but we do have a play in advising that. So I think that should be made clear. But it also, I think, we should make clear why we're regulating trees: public health, public safety, kind of a commons in an interesting, unique way. And also note that if everybody removes their trees, it affects everybody else. So just kind of giving a high level basis of why we've made these very direct choices.
Mhm.
Also cost benefit for sure. Every dollar that we put into the urban forest, how much do we get back in terms of services that you don't have to pay through environmental services, things like that. That's very important.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like you're suggesting a single letter, or what were you thinking when you made those comments?
I think a letter would be nice to submit, but also a statement just standing in front of a policy committee or the whole council, because the committees can change things and then council can change it afterwards. So I think it would be nice to do both and also kind of introduce ourselves almost to say, welcome, we're happy you're here in the city. We've been here for a very long time and we want to tell you about what we do, and create a partnership and an open space. while also very specifically advocating for what we do and what we believe in.
Nice, yeah, I was having similar thoughts that in person would be powerful. And even maybe more than once potentially,
Yeah.
dividing it up into several topics. Commissioner Nelson?
So City Forester Cairo remembers this. Merrill Reddish was very active with meeting in person with city council members or their staff. And I think she did that for years, and she was good at it, at least from what I hear. No one has really, there's been very little of that from Urban Forestry Commission. I think since she left, there was some, but I don't think there's been a whole lot. We talk about it, but we just haven't done that much. I was in a meeting yesterday with staff from city commissioners that are in District 2. And we were talking about trees. It was very interesting conversation, and I felt like it was new information for their staff. I mean, trees aren't something a lot of city council members know a lot about. So it's an area, it takes time, but if they're gonna restructure how the city operates, we're gonna have to maybe restructure how we operate too. So I don't know, but I actually found the staff very engaging and interested, so.
I think that argues for kind of going and doing an introduction, what we do, how they could use this as a resource for the community to come to, to get information or feedback on potential policies, things like that. But then also, a couple, 3 future sessions on, some of the high value aspects of the urban forest, and possibly even some of the ways it works. I mean, we'd have to talk through in detail what would be most useful given where they're at and what the climate is. So, why don't we plan on getting a more substantive agenda item on this? And with more included, as you suggested, Megan, take it from there.
Okay.
All right, thanks, everyone. Meeting.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's a great meeting.
Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Yes, you grad students.